Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and this video is actually part tutorial, part challenge. My friend and super famous quilter, Angela Walters, challenged me to come up with a bag project using only the fabrics that she sent me from her stash. Now, if you're a quilter and you don't know who Angela Walters is, definitely check out her work. She's a famous author, award-winning quilter. She has online courses and a ton of really fun videos right here on YouTube as well. So I'll include a link below for you to check out some of her work in case you're not familiar with her yet. Now, the challenge was I sent her some scraps from my stash and she sent me some fabric from her stash, and we each had to come up with a different handbag project. So I came up with my 1-hour tote project, and I think you're really going to enjoy what both of us came up with. Angela challenged me to come up with a project that was quilter friendly, that quilters could pull fabrics from their stash already to make something. Now, I design handbags, and I know that it can be tough to keep it just to fabric because oftentimes handbags require different fabrics, interfacing, stabilizers, and oftentimes even hardware. So this was quite the challenge, but I love a good challenge, and I definitely love a good tote bag. I'm a fan of practical projects, and I hope you enjoy learning how to make my 1-hour tote. Now for this bag challenge, here are the fabric scraps that Angela sent me from her stash. She must already know me and know that I'm not a huge fan of working with tiny little scrappy pieces. So I appreciate you sending these bigger chunks that I can totally work with. And this is, I think, going to be a really fun project. I've been playing around with different color combinations to see which ones I want to use. And I think I've selected these 3 here on the left. These, I definitely have enough to make another one of these 1-hour totes. But I think I'm going to work with this. Of course, I love bright colors, textured, geometric shapes. So I think we're going to use this on the exterior. I'm going to go with the darker color for the handles. That way it'll hide a little bit of the mucky hands that tend to grab my tote bags. And then I'm going to use this yellow for the facings and also for the interior false bottom that we're going to add to give our tote bag a nice rectangular and hard bottom. All right, so now that I've chosen my color palette to work with, let's start cutting out the pieces we'll need to make this tote. Angela, if you're watching, I hope you like what I'm going to whip up. For supplies, we have fabric, 100% cotton woven fusible interfacing, which is super common in any bag making project. You can find this at any local fabric store. Something to measure and cut your fabrics with. Rotary cutter works great. You can also use scissors, some rulers, a cutting mat, something to mark our fabric with. I'm also a big fan of glue basting, so I'll be using this glue in this project. And then you'll need some pins or clips, as well as a sewing machine, some thread, and an iron and ironing board. Now to prep our handles, we're going to place a strip with the pretty side of the fabric face down onto the ironing board and fold it in half lengthwise. Then I like to put some glue and bring in the long outer edges in to meet with that center crease that we created on the initial fold. You'll repeat that on both sides and make sure that you're pressing it with a dry hot iron. That will help set your glue and hold everything in place. Then you'll go back in with some more glue and place it right down the center to fold the entire strap shut. This will encase both raw edges and you get a nice sturdy handle. Now that the handles are prepped, we're going to top stitch along both long edges of both of these. And for a top stitch, first my thread here, I'm going to use a hot pink thread. Why not? This is going to be a challenge, so this should be fun. And I lengthened my straight stitch to about a 3.0 for my top stitching. So I'm going to stitch first on the side where the folds are to keep it closed. And I'm going to stitch both long dimensions of both of my handle strips. All right, so the handles are top stitched, and look how fun the top stitching looks in that bright pink color. Our two exterior pieces. This should be a perfect square if you're doing the 16.5-inch by 16.5-inch size. So to find the center front, orient the fabric. If it's directional, make sure that you have it facing you with whatever text or image is on there. Lay it like if you were looking at the outside of the bag, how it would look. Then I'm going to fold it in half vertically this way. And I'm just going to mark the center top here. You can see that, but I will make it a little darker. All right. Then we're going to measure 2.5 inches to the right and 2.5 inches to the left from the center mark. And as you probably are thinking, the straps will be attached there. I have my marks here. Then you're going to want to create a loop with this. Make sure that you don't have it twisted like this. Lay it out flat and then just bring in the short ends. And I like to place them to the outside of those marks. So right here, so that the inside edge of the strap is what's on that mark. All right, make sure there's no twists. Then we're going to hold these there. We're going to repeat this to the other exterior piece. Then we'll head over to the sewing machine and stitch them really close to the top edge there to base the handles in place. Now you can leave the bag and handles at the sewing machine. We're going to prep the facing pieces. So grab the two interfaced facing pieces and then some glue and your iron and ironing board. Take one of these guys, place them face down, right? Pretty side face down. And I'm just going to take one of the long edges and turn it up towards the interfacing about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. This doesn't have to be super exact. All we're doing is turning under this edge so we don't have to have an exposed raw edge when we attach this to the bag. So the key here is to be consistent, more so than what the actual turned under amount is. After I press it once, then I come in and add my glue because I don't want it to flip up like this. I want it to stay down. And you're only doing that to one of the long edges. So this one is done. The other edge stays raw, and then I'll repeat this step to this one. Let's grab these two and head over to the sewing machine. Now with one exterior piece and the handle on top, take your facing, one of them, and line up the raw edge, the side that hasn't been folded, and line it up here at the top so that the raw edge of this facing is matching the raw edge of the outside of the bag. So the handle should be sandwiched in between, and the side that you folded under should be down this way. And then we're going to use just 1/4 inch seam allowance and stitch across this top edge. Now we're here. So one at a time. I like to press as it was sewn. Then we're going to press away. And you're going to flip this back this way. So the handle should be coming out at the top, exterior fabric on one side, and facing on the other. And you'll see that we finished that bottom edge so that it's nice and turned under, and then we'll go back and top stitch it. So right here, I like to do it from this side. Make sure that the seam is running right along the top and press it all into place across the top. So repeat that to both of these panels. Now we'll take these back to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch from the facing side. So it's important to be accurate because you can't really see it from the pretty side as far as what you're lining up against. Instead, we're going to do it from this side and we're going to stitch just close to this bottom folded edge to secure this down into place, and we have no raw edges. All right, now we have a front and a back. So now we're ready to put this whole thing together, and we are going to sew this up using French seams. So this part of the French seam is absolutely crucial, and I know it's going to seem counterintuitive to what you're used to if you have ever sewn anything before. Normally we sew with pretty sides of the fabric pieces touching, but for French seams we need to do the opposite first because it requires a 2-seam step. So let me trim this extra that's sticking off right here so everything is nice and even. And I'm placing these two together with wrong sides touching, so the facings of each panel should be touching. And you're going to line up all your raw edges. We're going to stitch down this side across the bottom and then back up the other side using only a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And if you can sew 1/8 of an inch, that would be even better. But I know that can be tough sometimes. So we'll do a 1/4 of an inch and then we'll trim it down a little bit. So make sure that everything is matching nicely at the top, very important. And depending on how wide the seam allowance is that you use to stitch up around these 3 sides, you may have to trim it down. And the narrower you trim it down, the better, so that you won't get any little threads of the fabric caught on the second step of this French seam. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to basically grade down this seam allowance to half. So I'm shaving off 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to leave only about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance there. Okay, once you have a super duper narrow seam allowance there, you're going to flip this whole thing right side out. And now you're going to have it with pretty sides touching, which is the next step. This is probably the hardest step of the French seam. It's because the fabric wants to roll inside the seam, and so you want to take your time to roll everything out so you don't have like a big bubble of fabric in there. Okay? You want to expose the stitches pretty much so that you know that the seam is running right along that edge. And we're going to do that along all 3 sides that we just sewed. I like to press it. It helps the fabric set itself a little bit flatter. So then when we go back to stitch the second seam, I know I won't have any surprises in the seam. All right. Now that the bag is pretty sides touching, we're going to go in and pretend that the first seam we stitched is not even there. So now you're just going to do the same thing down 3 sides, okay? And what happens is that that super duper narrow seam allowance that we just graded down to 1/8 of an inch is going to get concealed and closed up in there. As long as the stitch line that you're going to go ahead and do now is wider than what you have hidden in there, it's going to be completely concealed. And that's how you get clean and professional looking seams both on the inside and the outside of your tote bag. So if you press it really good like I did here, you don't even need pins or clips. I'm just going to take it just like this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch about a 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 of an inch seam allowance this way. As long as it's bigger than 1/8, which is what I left in there for seam allowance, I should be good to go. I will back stitch at the beginning, come down and pivot on the corner, come down across the bottom, up again, and back stitch when I reach the other side. All right, give it a quick little press. And if you're short on time or a little impatient, you have a nice finished tote bag really at this point that has no raw edges on the inside or the outside. Super cute. But if you do want to find out how to make a boxed bottom, stay tuned because I'm going to show you how to do that next. And for that, I like to grab pins, something to mark my fabric with, and a little ruler. All right, I have my supplies. Now for the box bottom, I have it so that the bag is wrong side out. And I'm going to slip my hand just like this right into this corner so that this seam is running vertically down my arm this way. So like this. Because we need to create a triangle here that then we're going to stitch across to create a boxed bottom here. So what I like to do is I need to find where this seam meets up with the seam on the other side, and I like to split the middle with the seam allowance, meaning this French seam going one way and the one on this side to the other way. Instead of having them both in one direction, it creates a little bit too much bulk for my liking, so just put one way and one the other. And I'm going to try and match it up so that that seam, the stitch line, is going in line with the other one. And to check this out, you can go like this. Let me make sure my seams are... I put the pin on one side, and you see how it's a little off? I want it to come out right on the stitch line on the other side. All right, that's good. It's right there. So that's good enough for me. So if you have it, just run your pin that way, and you know that it'll be held in place, okay? Then we're going to come here, and we're going to draw a line across from my 0 point, 1, 2, 3 inches, and 3.5 should go from one edge of this side of the fabric to the other. And that's pretty good. If you need another pin before you move it, go ahead and insert it somewhere there so you can hold the fabric steady on both sides of that line. We'll head to the sewing machine and stitch on this line, but first I'm going to repeat this to the other corner. Here's a wider shot. See how this turns the other way? I want that seam to be going in the same direction the full length of the bottom. So just keep an eye on that before you start pinning anything in place. All right, now let's go sew on both of the lines that we drew on these corners, and I want you to backstitch at the beginning and at the ends of each line. All right, now I like to grab from the two corners here where the top of that little gusset seam that we just sewed stops, pinch it, and then make a straight line right there with it and press it like that to kind of give it more of that boxed corner shape. Do the same thing to the other side. And press a crease into the bottom there. All right. And again, at this step, you have a boxed bottom and you can just leave the tote bag as is. But if you're a little bit more confident of a beginner or intermediate and you want to try this next step, feel free to follow along. Now, the same thing that we just did to kind of make this crease down here, I'm going to do the same thing, but going up the sides as well. So here's what I'm going to do. I pinch it at the corner where that boxed corner is. And I'm only pinching the front part of the bag, so right where that seam ends, and then I basically will eyeball it to see how far. Do you see the seam here? So that it runs through the center, and I'm the same distance away on all these sides. So basically, from the side seam to where the box corner line stitching ends, this should be about the same. And I just grab it there and crease it. So press that crease running all the way up. And then do the same thing on this side. Grab this end, the top part, and it needs to come down. That looks about the same distance in both directions. And I will again set a crease in it. And this doesn't have to be super duper perfect, but it can be super tricky for beginners. So you see how I did those two creases? We're going to hold these together like that along the crease, and we're going to stitch an outline. We're going to pivot on this corner, pinch along the bottom, and then come up again to create more of a boxy shape into our tote bag. Even though it's just quilting cottons, and even though we have no lining or any batting or anything, this really helps give it good structure. So same thing here. All right, so I'm going to pinch these together, sew about 1/8 of an inch in as I have this folded. I'm going to come down here, pivot on this corner and stop and pinch this up, these two layers, just like a brown paper bag, okay? Pivot on the other corner and then pinch again and come up this way. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Right, isn't that cute? The creases give it the shape, but I find that if you stitch it down, it definitely helps hold it and gives it a little bit more structure. Plus you have more thread, more stitching, and it's just added rows of stitching to help it along to be a little bit sturdier. So now all we have left to do is to make a false bottom to put in here to make the bottom part of our tote sturdy. Super cute. Now to make the hard bottom part, we need to make a little sleeve for us to then slip something that's sturdy enough to hold the shape that we want at the bottom. So for that, we're starting off with a piece that measures 8 inches by 11. And I want you to turn it so pretty side is face down. And on one of the short sides, you're going to turn it under by about 1/4 of an inch. Just turn the fabric back towards the wrong side of the fabric 1/4 of an inch. And press that. If it doesn't stay for you, feel free to add a couple dots of glue here too. That will work fine. Now you'll flip it pretty side face up, fold it in half, lengthwise this way along the 11-inch dimension. And we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and stitch up just 2 sides. So this short side that has the raw edge will pivot on the corner and come down this way and backstitch when we get here. So the side that we just turned under, I want you to leave that side open. I'm going to trim away from the corners just a little bit. And then we're going to flip this right side up. Now let's give it a good press so it lies nice and flat. So now you've created a sleeve that you can slip in any type of stiff material that's going to add the amount of rigidity that you want to the bottom of your 1-hour tote. So a couple of different options. You can use cardboard, any kind of stiff papers. You can glue multiple layers of thinner things together and slip it in there. You can also use plastic packaging or template plastic. I happen to have this heavy duty interfacing here, so I'm just going to cut it down to size. And you'll find that depending on how thick whatever it is that you're going to insert in the sleeve is, you may need to adjust the dimensions. But a good rule of thumb is going to be to cut it down to 3 inches by 10 inches. So let's head over to the sewing machine, stitch it shut, and then slip this inside the bottom of our tote. All right, so let's put this inside the bottom here. And you see, you get a nice, more of a shapely bottom to our 1-hour tote. And that's it for this 1-hour tote video tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Angela, I hope you liked the tote bag I made with the fabrics you sent me. And if you want to see her side of the challenge, definitely use the link that I've included for you below. I'll also include a little card here, and you can go ahead and check out the project that she came up with using the scraps that I sent her from my fabric stash. Now, if you want to be a part of this challenge or give any of these tutorials a try, go ahead and use the hashtag that I've included right here on the video for you, and that way we can check out what you are working on. Thanks again for watching this video. Remember to give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Thanks again for watching, happy sewing, and I'll see you in the next video.